Listening to that is Dr. Webster Zimbara from the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation. Dr. Zimbara, good afternoon to you. So our presidency seems to believe that there may be a way for the opposition in Zimbabwe and the government in Zimbabwe to work together. Is there any reason to believe that Zanu-PF will give up any political power?
Well, I do not. Good afternoon, and good afternoon to your viewers. I do not think there is that appetite from Zanu-PF. And if you are to look at the events that have taken place, the inauguration of the president on the 4th of September makes him legally and actually legitimately the sitting president of Zimbabwe. So unlike prior to that inauguration, President Mnangagwa was president-elect, and the opposition led by Nelson Chamisa had a chance legally to challenge the election in court, but they abandoned that in the 11th hour. And the reasons that have been given is that, one, there is the general belief that the courts would not have adjudicated fairly for him. And secondly, there is also the argument that since the SADC Electoral Observer Mission as a preliminary report said that some aspects of the election did not meet the Zimbabwean Constitution, did not meet the Electoral Act of Zimbabwe, and did not meet the SADC guidelines on democratic elections. We are now waiting for the final report of the same. But what that means is Zimbabwe, as a sovereign state, is having a substantive president in the form of President Mnangagwa, who has just started his second term. And if there are any processes that are to come out of SADC, one, those processes will not be as fast as people may want, some people may want. And secondly, when the final report is prepared, it is sent first to the organ, and the current members of the organ are Zambia, Tanzania, and Namibia. And it will also be sent to the SADC Council of Ministers, which is a council of foreign ministers of all SADC countries. And from there, it will be debated and then elevated to the SADC heads of state. And here is the interesting thing. The vice chair of SADC at the moment is President Mnangagwa. And the next SADC summit is happening in Zimbabwe next year. So in terms of timing, that process will take its course and may not be as immediate. Then what we have just heard from Vincent Magwenya, the presidential spokesperson here, also conforms to what was said by the ANC Secretary General, Fikile Mbalula, when he wrote a letter to Wits University that postponed an event in which a Zimbabwean government critique Ibo Mandaza was going to be the main speaker. Fikile argued that there are some processes that are happening in Zimbabwe that are being managed by ANC. But what we know openly is that when ANC is in Zimbabwe, it is there as a fraternal partner to its sister party, Zanu-PF. So if we are to see something that will come out of it, I think at the moment it is still under wraps. We also know that Nelson Chamisa has sent emissaries to different countries in the region. So there is a diplomatic offensive. The fact is, the talk of the Zimbabwean election is going on, but whether it will result in first a rerun of the presidential election, that is very highly unlikely. Secondly, if it is going to emerge, we are going to see perhaps a formation of an opening of dialogue, perhaps leading to another GNU. That is also quite unlikely at the moment, but you never know in politics.
So, Dr. Zimbara, it would seem to me, and excuse my cynicism, so I apologize in advance, but it seems to me the most likely thing that's going to happen is that Zanu-PF has, and I think most people would accept this, used violence to stay in power in the past. Emmerson Mnangagwa came to office first through a coup. Yes, there have been 2 elections since then, but he was perfectly happy to benefit from a military coup. So let's be very clear what we're talking about here. We're talking about someone who's happy to come to power through undemocratic processes and to govern in a party in which there's strong evidence that they've used violence and strong evidence that he himself has used violence in the past going back to the early 1980s. Then you've got that. It would seem to me very likely, based on what our president has said, based on what the Secretary General of our governing party has said, that there'll be no condemnation from South Africa and probably no condemnation from SADC. And again, excuse the cynicism, sir, it would seem likely the people of Zimbabwe are going to have another 5 years of the governance that they've already had. Would that be too cynical of you?
Well, I would want to correct you on something here. Yes, President Mnangagwa got into a coup, but that coup was sanitized by a Zimbabwean court, and that court has not been challenged. That basically what happened in the coup, it was legalized in a Zimbabwean court. And secondly, the 2018 elections that took place gave Mnangagwa his first term. And although that were also contested, it legalized the Zimbabwean state as having constituted. And now we've just come out of election that is again being contested by the opposition. Still, we are going to see the contestation against a legally constituted sitting head of state. And that becomes very difficult for the opposition to play around. That is why they are pushing for a regional offensive, so that perhaps if there would be some bit of isolation of the sitting government, that may put pressure on President Mnangagwa. And remember, we have walked this road before. In 2018, we had a sham election and President Mugabe was sworn in, but the swearing in later on was nullified. However, when I look at the present situation, not only in Southern Africa, but in Africa, the appetite to have Zimbabwe on the SADC agenda or an AU agenda, I don't see it present. But let us look at the post-election reality now. Just 2 days ago, an opposition MP of Sunningdale, Maureen Kadebaonga, was arrested only for the courts, for the prosecutor general to say this MP has no case to answer. Another MP, Gift Siziba, was also detained briefly yesterday. And just before I came onto this show, the deputy mayor of Harare, who is an MDC councillor, I understand she has just been arrested. If this would be the trend, then that would project President Mnangagwa as this hardliner who, even though he has preached peace to the effect that we saw a reduction in violence, he has preached unity, but when this happens to opposition MPs, then he would be presenting himself as someone who indicates left but turns right.
Dr. Webster, Zambara, thank you. At the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, really appreciate the time and the knowledge, sir.